Hilchos Shegagos Perek Shleisha Asar, the laws of sacrifices for inadvertent transgressions, chapter 13. We're continuing the discussion on the court's sacrifice. If the court makes a problematic ruling and everybody follows the ruling, then instead of everybody having to carry the guilt for their own sin and having to bring a personal sin offering, the court has to bring a sin offering. Now, it's very important to understand the core principle of all these halachot, and that is that the court's obligation versus everybody's obligation is mutually exclusive. That means, if the court is bringing the sin offering on behalf of everybody, then everybody who did the sin is exempt from bringing a sin offering. Their atonement happens through the court's sin offering. But if we say that the court is exempt from bringing a sin offering, then that means that everybody who did the sin is accountable on their own and has to bring a sin offering. So that's where yesterday's chapter concluded, where the Rambam said that there's 9 conditions. In order for the court to be liable to carry the responsibility for everybody else, 9 conditions have to be met. Just going to quickly go over them outside, and then what's going to happen is today we're going to expound on 7 out of the 9 conditions, and tomorrow we're going to deal with the last 2. So what are the 9 conditions? Number 1, it has to be the court of 71 judges. Not any lower courts. Only they. If they make a mistake, they have to bring an offering. If any lower court makes a mistake, and Jews trust them, the court is not obligated, the Jews have to bring the sin offering. Second condition, the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the court, has to be present when that erroneous ruling is ruled. If he's not, again, the court is exempt, people are responsible. 3, everybody sitting on the court has to be eligible to sit on the court. There can't be any converts or illegitimate people that couldn't be proper judges. If you're not fit to sit on the bench and you're part of the ruling,
but they won't be there in any...
we hope they wouldn't be there, but let's say they got in there and then they inspected, then the court wouldn't carry responsibility, only the people would. Number 4, you need to have a unanimous mistake. Everybody, or at least the majority, needs to be on the side of ruling this way, and nobody can be actively disagreeing based on, let's say, a biblical source, or know that they're making a mistake. And we'll see about this in the chapter. Number 5, the court has to actively say, do it. You can't be walking by the court, let's say, and hearing a discussion, and then based on what you hear, you say, oh, they said I could do it. They have to actively tell you you can do it.
Wait for the ruling.
Yes. Number 6, a majority of the Jewish people has to make a mistake based on the ruling. Number 7, they have to be making a mistake based on the ruling. Right? What if you didn't hear the ruling, and it happens to be you made the same mistake as the ruling, but your mistake wasn't because of the ruling? So then you can't blame the court. You have to take your own responsibility. That's going to be the 7 we're going to discuss today. And then the 2 that we're going to discuss tomorrow is the idea that the court can never fully uproot a mitzvah. Their ruling has to always be preserving part of the mitzvah and uprooting part of the mitzvah. And that when they recover and when they find out their problem, they have to find out exactly what the erroneous ruling was. It can't be vague and ambiguous. So these are the 9 conditions. Again, 7 are going to be discussed today. The other 2 tomorrow. Let's go for it inside. It says the Rambam halacha aleph, Keitzad im chaser achas mikol hadrachim shebe'arnu. What does it mean that if one of the 9 ways are lacking that we explained yesterday, yipatru beis din v'yischayvu ha'osim, the court will be exempt, and those that did the sin, they'll be liable. What does that mean? Let's describe it case by case. So the Rambam begins, Harei shehayru beis din shel echad min hashvatim lahem. It wasn't the high court. This is again already violating number 1. It wasn't the 71 judges court. It was one of the regular tribes courts. And they ruled to that particular tribe, shechelev hakeva muter, that the fat covering the digestive system, remember this from the laws of non-kosher, every kosher animal has the 4 stomachs. That's how they digest food, in a process of 4 times. And there's 2 layers of fat that cover this system. One on the top, one on the bottom. It's called the greater omentum and the lesser omentum in today's biology. And this fat is forbidden directly by the Torah. Comes one of the tribe's courts and says, you guys should know, this is permitted. And the people of their place ate it based on their words. This court is exempt. And whoever ate the fat has to carry his own liability and bring a sin offering. Why? Because this did not meet condition number 1. Condition number 1 is that it has to be the 71 judges. And this wasn't the 71 judges. Similarly, let's say it even was the 71 judges. And they gave out a ruling, shadam halev mutter, that blood in the heart is permitted. Now, of course, blood in the animal's heart is forbidden, but they made a mistake. But the head of the court wasn't there that day. He was on vacation. He wasn't present when the ruling was issued. That's violation of condition number 2. Or it turns out that one of the people sitting on the bench that day wasn't supposed to be on the bench. They weren't eligible to be appointed to the court. Maybe he was a convert or an illegitimate child, or he was too old, or he never had children, or things like that. In order to be a judge, you have to be somewhat compassionate. A person who's old forgets what it's like, the grind of daily life. A person who never had kids, the Gemara says, doesn't have the natural compassion that a parent would have. They cannot sit on the court. And then in this scenario, everybody follows the ruling, does what they said, and they ate the blood of the heart. Because either condition 2 or condition 3 was violated, so the court doesn't carry the responsibility, they're exempt. And whoever ate has to bring the sin offering for his inadvertent transgression. So now that Rambam says, let's talk about the source for this. Who told you that the verses are only talking about the high court? The highest court, meaning. Shenemar, says the Rambam, V'im kol adas Yisrael yishgu. V'goymer. That was the verse from yesterday. Here. V'im kol adas Yisrael yishgu. The passage which introduces the halacha of the court carrying responsibility, it says if the entire community of Israel makes a mistake. How could there be a court who's responsible for the entire community of Israel if it's not the 71 judges' court? Any other court was only responsible locally for their tribe or for their province or region. The only time it's all of the Jewish people is if it's the court of 71 judges. How do we know condition number 3? That everybody has to be eligible to be ruling. Shenemar, because it says in the verse, V'im me'enei ha'eda. Right? If it's concealed from the eyes of the community. And we said that eyes of the community is the leading court. But right here, says the Rambam, Ad shiyu lahem ke'enayim. The court has to be the type of court who could be the eyes of the Jewish people. And the commentators explain here that Rambam is alluding to the second condition, that the head of the yeshiva has to be there, because only when he's there are they considered to be the eyes of the community. Then we have to also examine the word ha'eda, the community. Where else do we find this word in the Torah? Ulahalon hu'aymer. Later on, when it comes to capital cases, it says, V'shaftu ha'eda. The court should rule, but it also calls them ha'eda. So from here we learn, whenever you have the same word appearing twice in the Torah, you have what's called Gzeira Shava. You can learn laws, one from the other. Ma ha'eda ha'amura b'dinei nefashis. Kulan ru'uyin lahira. The same way when it comes to the word ha'eda, when it comes to capital cases. We know that they're referring to judges that are eligible to be on the bench. How do we know that? The Rambam doesn't go into it, but the Talmud says that when Moshe Rabbeinu first appointed the court in the desert, the court of 71 judges, it says in the pasuk, "V'nasu itcha," they will carry it with you. That means itcha b'doimin lach. They're going to be similar to you. You have to be on the same stature as Moshe, eligible for the court. So therefore, from there we could learn af eda ha'amura b'shegagos ad shiyu kulan ru'yin lahira. When Torah uses the word eda over here, it also means they have to be all eligible to sit on the bench. So that covers the first 3 conditions. Now let's go to the 4th condition. Unanimous mistake, or at least a majority mistake. B'cheinim hayru. Let's say, similarly, if the court gave out a ruling, v'yada echad mehen shato, and one of the judges wasn't just arguing on the basis of logic. He knew that they were making a mistake. V'amar lahem toyimata, and he says, you guys are making a mistake. Don't do this. V'rabu alav hamatirim, but you know how courts go. There's a majority. A majority decided that it should be permitted. V'hitiru, and they permitted it. So then, harei beis din pturin, the court is exempt. When they find out what they did wrong, and they're going to remember, that one guy was telling us that we're making a mistake, he was right the whole time, they're actually going to be exempt. Everybody who acted on their word needs to bring their own standard sin offering for their sin. Shenemar, because it says, same verse as before. The entire community has to make a mistake. Everybody has to be under the mistake. At least not to know directly that they're making a mistake. It has to be a unanimous or a majority mistake. Yoda echad min hasanhedrin miutam. Shato hamatirin v'shasku. What if one of the judges knew that they were making a mistake, but he was quiet? He didn't protest. Here you see the power of protest. If you see something is wrong, you must protest, because if you don't protest, hayil v'hayru, v'loy hayasham chaylik, once they ruled and there was no active dissenter, nobody was clearly arguing, upashta ha'hayra v'reiva kol, and then the ruling spread to most of the community, harei bezdin chayavin bekarban, v'chol she'asa al piyem pater. The bezdin will be liable to bring the sacrifice, and everybody who acted on their basis will be exempt. Ve'elu sheshasku. And what about those judges who were quiet? What if they followed the court's ruling? Im asu al pi elu shehayru. If they acted based on those other judges who gave the ruling, harei elu chayavin, they're actually going to be held liable for their own sin offering, mipnei sheloi talu bebezdin, because they didn't hang their hats on the court. They knew deep inside they were making a mistake, and so they have to carry their own liability. V'chein, so too, we now move on to the next condition. What is the next condition? That it has to be clearly stated as an instruction that it's permitted. Im nasu v'nasnu badavar. Let's say the court was engaged in a debate. They were debating something. V'amru, and then somebody just said, part of the debate, davar zeh mutarhu. This act is permitted. V'lo hayru la'am v'lo amru lahem mutarin atem lases. But they didn't talk to the nation. They didn't say to the people, you are permitted to do it. They just announced it in court.
So it stays behind closed door?
In a way, it was behind closed doors, in a way. And in the meantime, b'shama hashemea mehen be'ez shagamru mutar, somebody was listening into the court. And he hears when they decide that it's permitted. Here's what they say. V'halach v'asa kefim hashashama. And he goes and he acts as he heard. But he never got the direct instruction, you can do it.
Right. It's like a leak.
Yeah.
Somebody leaks.
They leaked the information.
Puts it out there on the internet.
Pre the court giving their instruction.
Right, and then it turns out it's not exact.
Even if it is.
Even
if it is.
being promulgated.
Yes, but they didn't get the direct go ahead. They didn't get the green light. Everybody who acted carries their own responsibility, brings us an offering, and the court is exempt, because they never said clearly. They never said do it. Now the sixth condition, so too if the court gave a ruling, and only a minority of the congregation had a chance to act on their word. And then the inadvertency was discovered, the error was discovered. The court is exempt, and the minority that did it is liable. Each one will have to bring his own sin offering. Halacha beis. If the court themselves, members of the court themselves, acted based on their ruling, they don't combine to the majority. The majority which is required has to be excluding the court. The majority has to be outside of the high court. Another ruling about the majority, says the Rambam, we only care about the Jews living in Israel. If most of the people of Israel acted on the court's words, even if the entirety of the people that did it were all from one tribe, as we said yesterday, the majority of the population all came from one tribe, or if a majority of the tribes sinned, even though they're the minority of the population, the court is liable and the people that acted are exempt. What's an example of this? Ketzat? Says the Rambam, all the Jews living in Israel numbered 600,001. And who acted on the court's ruling? 300,001, so exactly over 50%. And they were all from the tribe of Yehuda. Or the people that acted were 7 tribes, all 7 tribes, but only 100,000 people. They're not even a sixth of the population. Still, they're the majority of the tribes. The court is liable. Everybody who acted on them is exempt. We don't care about those who are living outside of Israel. The only people that are called a congregation, right? The Torah says, we saw it yesterday, here, the community has to bring the sin offering. So it calls it a community. Who is called a community? Only Jews living in Israel. Even though for many things, like the census, Menashe and Ephraim were called 2 separate tribes, for this matter, they're not called 2 separate tribes, they're called one tribe. And so they don't combine to the majority of tribes as two, only as one. Halacha Gimel. Hayu ha'oisin merubin b'shas hachet, umu'atin b'shas yediyah. Going back to the majority. When they did the sin, it was the majority of the population who did the sin. By the time they found out, they were the minority. How could that be? Says the commentaries. People from this majority died. No, they died. They died before it was found out. By the time they found out the sin, the people who hadn't done the sin were the majority. Or the opposite. When they did the sin, they were the minority. Then a bunch of Jews from the majority died. And now, if you count the Jews, the majority sinned. It says that you go after the time of the act of the sin. Whoever was the majority then, stick to that. So if the majority sinners, they bring the sin offering. If not, no sin offering. Halacha Daled, another law about majority. Comes the court, and they rule about a specific fat. Even though it's supposed to be forbidden, they say it's permitted. Only a minority of the congregation acts on their words, so then they shouldn't really be liable, right? They found out that they sinned, and they retracted. The court retracted the law. Then they came out with another mistaken ruling. A certain type of idol worship is forbidden. Another minority of the congregation followed this second ruling of idol worship. So if we take the participants of the first ruling and the second ruling and we combine them, there's now a majority of the Jewish people who followed erroneous rulings of the court. Says that Rambam, interestingly, they do combine. Even though there was an awareness in between. Says that Rambam, when do we say this? If the ruling court was the same court both times. But if it was one court of 71 judges who gave the first ruling, then there was a massive, attack or something, all these judges died. And a whole new set of 71 judges came and gave a second ruling, these do not combine with those. In most texts, you have the end of the halacha here, but the consensus is that halacha continues to the next halacha. Even if both courts had ruled about the same thing, like two different fats or two different bloods. As long as it's two different courts, that already divides it. And now that Rambam returns to the conditions, the seventh condition that we're going to discuss today, that there has to be a mistake based on the ruling. So too, if the people that acted were not acting mistakenly on the basis of the ruling, the court is exempt and everybody is liable. How would you ascertain that? Or what's a case of making a mistake not based on the ruling? The court gives out the ruling that they're allowed to eat, again, this same one, the omentum, the fat that's covering the digestive system. One Jew, learned Jew, he knows that it's actually forbidden. But he's like, wait, it's the court, I have to submit. He ate it because of their ruling. He thought, he thought, look, I know it's a mistake, but maybe the Torah says you have to believe the court, you have to follow the court, even if they're making a mistake. This guy, when he finds out, will have to bring his own sin offering. And he cannot be counted amongst the number of people who acted inadvertently, because he really knew that they were making a mistake. He wasn't totally acting based on their ruling. But says that Rambam, when do we say this? The person who knew that the court was mistaken has to himself be somewhat of a sage, or at least a student who could be eligible to sit on the court. But if he was just a regular guy, and he thinks that it's forbidden, he is exempt. Regular people, they think they know, but they're not always sure. Like, I think I heard it's a mistake, but you know what? I guess the rabbis are saying differently. I'm not sure. And he can be counted amongst the people that are acting mistakenly. V'chein im lo yada shato. Let's say if in a case, doesn't know they made a mistake. He trusts the court. V'niskavin lechol shuman v'chelev. And he's eating a sandwich, or he's having dinner, and he wants to eat some permitted fats, some forbidden fats, v'achal chelev akeva shehitiruhu, and he ends up eating this fat which they permitted, v'hu lo yada shu chelev akeva, but he didn't know that he's doing it. He heard about the ruling, but he doesn't realize that what he's eating is that fat. Because when he ate it on his own mistake, not hanging his hat on the court. And again, he cannot be counted amongst the people that have sinned based on the court's words. Because it says, this is the verse we say on Yom Kippur. Hashem forgives the people. Why? Because everybody sinned inadvertently. That means that everybody has to be doing the same type of mistake. Has to be one uniform mistake for everybody. The mistake being trusting the court. Not that you knew they were making a mistake and you had another type of mistake. It's the same mistake for everybody. Let's say you thought you were very smart and you trusted yourself. And you eating this fat of the stomach system that the court also said it's permitted, not because of what they said, because of what you said. You think you're smarter than the rabbis. Like, oh, I have a reason also why it's permitted. He's liable to his own sin offering. This is the rule. Anybody who hangs their hat on the court is exempt. Again, so long as all the conditions were met, 7 of which we discussed today, 2 more coming tomorrow. But if you're liable on your own, you cannot be added to the number of people who made the mistake to constitute a majority. Let's say the court, for whatever reason, became a bunch of heretics or whatever, purposely they declared something forbidden, permitted. No mistakes. They knew what they were doing. And the community followed them blindly by mistake. The court is exempt because they're acting purposely. Everybody who acted on their words is liable to themselves because they acted inadvertently. So the court actually causes the people extra heartache. What if the court issued the ruling by mistake? Everybody knew there was a mistake, and you shouldn't listen to them. But they still acted on their words. Everybody is exempt. The court is exempt because the community didn't act based on their ruling. They didn't mislead the community. The community knew they were wrong. Everybody that acted is also exempt because they did it purposely. They knew that it's a mistake and they still did it. They knew it was a mistake and you shouldn't do it, and they still did it. So they carried their own responsibility, korban chatas for themselves. And again, tomorrow will come the last 2 conditions to be elaborated.